Hello, music lovers and culturally defined human organisms. Welcome back to another episode of my podcast, John's Zoom Jams. Dating back at what I've covered so far in the season, I started looking back on rock music that has made an impact on the culture of that particular decade. So, a couple of episodes ago, I talked about the music of the 60s and the subcultures that dominated during that time, like the hippies and the counterculture movement. The switch and change of music from the 90s and 2000s was a phenomenal movement in many genres, ranging from rap, R&B, hip hop, and of course rock. My guest with me today is a dear friend of mine and an amazing songwriter who fronts his band Latchkey Kids. Hanny graduated from Rutgers, New Brunswick with a bachelor's degree in political science and economics this past spring. Hanny has great ties to the underground music scene in New Brunswick and has toured his music up and down the East Coast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Hanny. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Again, that was a very colorful and kind opening.
Happy to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Very happy to be here. I'm happy to talk about what we're talking about.
So we're at the beginning of a new decade and a century, more particularly. There would be a force of new technologies in music that would change the industry forever. The business model that had been driven by the rise of rock since the late 60s was hugely profitable, with manufacture, promotion, and the distribution of albums seemed to be in a terminal crisis at the turn of the century. But on the other hand, the live music sector, long regarded as uncompetitive commercially and therefore dependent on record company sales, it flourished during this time. And the prices that people were prepared to pay for concert tickets rose dramatically from the mid 90s after a new multinational music corporation emerged, which is Live Nation. So, Hanny, I'm sure you've been in a situation where a ticket was so much money because of Live Nation and like Ticketmaster sales.
Yeah, for sure. That's it's always easy. Retailing tickets, just because all those places seem really upcharge or have like fines and surcharges and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
and nowadays
experienced
it's
it a lot.
$200 for like a pit ticket at some concerts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I always thought that's how it always was, but I guess not. I guess there was more standardization of ticket prices, but yeah, now it's I guess like a big scramble.
Oh, definitely. I mean, when you see kind of a vintage rock concert posters and tickets were maybe $20 or $10.
Mm-hmm.
I wish, I'm so envious of those people who paid that little to,
Yeah.
big acts like Nirvana or Chili Peppers, something like that.
Imagine there's like Madison, whatever at Madison
Mhm.
Square Garden, Green Day at Madison Square Garden in 1994, $25 or something.
Right.
With inflation, that's still kind of a lot of money, but I see what you're saying. Like,
The value of live music rose as the amount of money people were prepared to spend on CDs in the digital age. And part of the live music industry's new profitability was an effect of its own use of digital technology. So the rise of CDs and that kind of distribution was immensely like powerful for like music sales during this time.
Oh wow, okay, yeah. I guess I never put two and two together that the music sales could affect the ticket sales, and I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
And Live Nation actually merged with Ticketmaster in 2010, and their corporate entity is now known as Live Nation Entertainment.
Isn't that kind of like Monopoly-esque?
It is. That there's a Pearl Jam lawsuit that happened in the 90s. They eventually lost, but they couldn't fight it. You couldn't fight the monopoly because it owned all the ticket sales, and that's why they kept getting more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know. Pearl Jam went through that. That's good that they fight stuff like that.
No, definitely. That was a cool time.
Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, I mean, I never really investigated why that shift happened, so I'm kind of learning from you a little bit, to be honest. But I definitely do see that it's like present and it's there, and I think we're going to talk a lot about digital stuff today for sure, but there's also an upside to like the digital marketplace, if you will, because sure you have like your official means of getting stuff, but I think the 2000s was a defining decade for independence altogether. So we can spend a great deal talking about independent music, which is, what what I love to talk about, and what I want to be a part of, and what I am already a part of as an independent music, creator, as a music creative, whatever. There's so many people selling tickets like in the Facebook events of certain what's it called, shows, and a lot of like behind the scenes stuff that I think is a lot easier to do now because of like the online digital world, scouting or whatever. What is it called? Ticket scouts and whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Scalpers.
Scalpers. That's it. Scalping. Yeah.
I think the digital revolution had an odd consequence of reviving pre-corporate rock methods of musical consumption. And I'm talking particularly about the iPod, which was the first one was released on October 23rd, 2001. And it's a portable music player for people to carry around personal libraries of their favorite tracks in a digital format. And it made the single song rather than a whole album the focus of personal consumption. And I'm sure you remember getting your first iPod. Tell me what that's like. Like, it's kind of what you and I grew up on. Was the standard. We didn't have to live in a time where there was only albums on record players, and music wasn't seen as more like an activity rather than just something you would have on. Like, I'm listening to music. I think the definition kind of changed in the 2000s.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a loaded trip down memory lane, actually, because I think everybody in our age group has a relationship with iPods to some extent. I mean, my first iPod was an iPod I found when I was like 7 or 8 years old, when I was in Egypt once for my
wow.
So my family has like Middle Eastern background and stuff. So my aunt got married in Egypt, and I was really small when that happened. It was a really actually memorable summer for me for a variety of reasons. There was like a war going on in Lebanon, where I'm from, and I was there for that as well. But that's a story for another day. And we were in Egypt for her wedding before I went back to Lebanon. And the first day at the hotel, I was just sitting down, and I just kind of was relaxing into the seat. And lo and behold, my hand kind of dipped down, and I felt something like velvety. I felt like a velvet case of sorts. I picked it up, and there's this velvet case about this big, and it was around 2006, loaded iPod Nano, filled with just like thousands of songs, and that became like my iPod. My first iPod was an iPod I found at the hotel.
In a seat.
In a seat, yeah. And I showed my mom, and my mom, being like thrifty, was like, finders keepers, I guess. And it wasn't like a thing like an iPhone today. I guess an iPod really is a type. In retrospect, we probably should have reported it to the hotel.
Probably, but I don't. Maybe that's 14 years ago at this point. He's still looking for it in Egypt.
Yeah, probably a bad person for not reporting it. My mom's probably even worse for encouraging her son to keep it. But honestly, that memory is one of those formative memories for me.
Of course.
And, even in still forming memories around music, it was the first time where like music became a part of my identity. I found this Nano. It was filled with all these songs. And then it was filled with a lot of like adult songs that as a 7-year-old I wasn't allowed to listen to, but I still like was able to sneak a listen, and just remember like Gangster's Paradise being on there and like all this other stuff. And then my uncle, I think, like helped me delete all the songs or keep some of them or something. And then that was the first time I started loading songs onto an iPod.
Yeah. Your own personal library of your own music.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
Music quite literally fell in your lap, or maybe more specifically, you fell in its lap.
Yeah,
because you sat on it essentially.
Literally, and I just reached down kind of really naturally and felt something, and then I just grabbed it. It was
wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty special story, actually.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. And then later on in life, like I had when I was 9, 10, late elementary school, like my best friend Mike had his brother's old iPods, and so that's where I actually learned about a lot of independent music, even at that age. Like his brother would find like pop punk bands that nobody knew about, and we'd listen to them, and which was really cool, like to do when you're 9 and 10. You're like, wow, like nobody knows who this band is.
Definitely.
But it's on this little iPod, and Mike and I would sit in the back of the bus, like he has one earphone and I have one earphone, or we're listening together.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I'm sure everybody has like some iPod story from our age group. Gen Z millennial to Gen Z, like that weird 90s born kids, but like 2000s, like, kids, everybody has like an iPod story.
I remember my first iPod. I think I got it for Christmas. It must have been like the third or fourth generation by that point. But
Mhm.
every year, the new iPod was like the new iPhone. Everyone had to get it, and I was very happy with mine. But as I was saying before, it just kind of became the standard for how people listen to music. And I think also the sites for musical discoveries like MySpace and YouTube, like their creations were more important than radio stations or record stores. And
Mm.
I wanted to mention that a few bands such as Arctic Monkeys and Kings of Leon, they released their first albums on MySpace and or social networking
Yeah,
websites.
yeah.
And I think so. I mean, the early versions of social media were crucial to, the rise of new music.
Hey, you took my talking point, man. That's it. I agree. I think like that's almost just as important as we could talk all day about like iTunes, but later in the 2010s we could talk about like streaming services. But
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the most influential change was for independent music specifically. What I mean, really was the creation of like how can you connect independent musicians and creatives to each other, and around the world, without having a world class record deal. Like how can you connect to anybody, wherever you're from? And that started in the 2000s for sure. Maybe even before then, but like, in a real rapid stead in the 2000s.
I think those technological developments for musicians also had a big part because we were experiencing easier ways to record music, with multi-track tape recorders or synthesizers, more digital equipment. It changed the meaning of musical instruments. There was no longer a clear distinction between producing a sound and like reproducing it.
Mm.
And from a listener's point of view, the distinction between music and noise changed dramatically. Because I think music just became ubiquitous in a way.
Mm.
And if it was in public places or in your home on the radio or CD player, uh, blurring in the distinction between public and private use, I think music just kind of came synergy. It was everywhere,
Mm. Mm.
and it
Oh wow.
traveled so much farther than it ever had before.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I mean, I wonder what. I'm sure we could have a whole conversation about psychologically what that does to us, or sociologically. Like,
Have you ever not been to like a grocery store or a shopping area and they haven't played music? It's almost like if they don't play music, it's weird, right?
what is that? Do you think? I mean, we weren't alive before that, but I don't remember a time when that wasn't the case. I guess like in shopping, like in Macy's and department stores, there's a very specific type of music that used to be played when we were younger. I feel like that's changed, which is that whole people. You and I feel like talked about it once. That whole genre of music that like is that's very specific, like mall sound.
Is
What
vaporwave?
vaporwave? There it is. That's it. You know vaporwave, right?
I do.
Like very niche, cozy yet creepy sort of sound that like comes out of department stores. You know? It's maybe that's like the "I want your money" sound sort of thing. Like induces you to shop more.
I was curious if you had ever experienced the digital streaming services of Napster or LimeWire back in the day.
Oh man, you're gonna ask me that question, I'm gonna get arrested. They're gonna find me. um, I cannot confirm nor deny my involvement in either of those, but I can provide information on friends of mine and people that will remain alias. At this point, I'm a music obsessive. Like I'm a writer and stuff, and I'm trying to be a writer and be a better writer, and learn a little bit more about all kinds of music related writing, and that not just includes like writing songs, but like compositions and composers, but also like obsessed with music critics and also music biographers. So in like watching a lot of interviews, I always feel like there's that essential question always comes up. What was the first record you bought? They always ask somebody. And I know Amoeba even like somehow I've seen some Amoeba stuff where that some of the Amoeba videos, what's in your bag and stuff, where they
Of course,
talk
yeah.
about, oh, what was the first record you bought or what? So that's a very common question. There's sometimes they're on the younger side and they'll say, oh, my mom used to play these records in the house. She was into folk music. She was into, American Western country or whatever. And then I kind of noticed that a lot of them found their musical identity when they were 11, 12, 13 and older, because you actually have to physically get money, go to a store, buy a record, bring it home to your family turntable. For our generation, which is weird, is I don't know if it really helped us make a musical identity, but our exposure to music was so much more precocious, I think. Like we started so much younger, getting like exposed to music at our own pace rather than what was artificially kind of crafted for us by our home environments. So we had YouTube, like a lot of sites that convert YouTube video, which has audio, converting that video and audio to MP3. There's a lot of things, a lot of the tactics that people our age back in the 2000s did to put, MP3 recordings onto iPods. And I think the reason why everything you talked about, LimeWire, Napster, those actually are pretty present during that time. And I don't know if it's just adults. I think a lot of people in our generation did that too, mostly because we didn't have credit cards, we didn't have money. So, whereas back in the day, I feel like you put your change together, you go physically buy the thing. Suddenly when you make it digital, you make it easier for people that have digital, dispensable digital means of currency. So, for us, we didn't have that. iTunes cards were, if you're a music lover, if you remember, that was like a famous gift, right? Isn't that such a big, like,
oh my God.
Oh, I got a $10 iTunes card, so then you buy this like iTunes only music video or something. I remember even on the PSP, the portable PlayStation thing, I got once I got a free download of like School of Rock. So I have all of School of Rock on my old PSP somewhere, somewhere. I don't even know where it is.
And like $10 would only get you like one album maybe in the back in the day.
That's true. So I mean, I think a lot of people were like, okay, well, I'm 7, 8, 9 years old. I just learned about YouTube. Music videos were a big thing in the 2000s, especially if you liked rock music. And I think that's your whole thing is focusing on rock music mostly, right?
Correct.
I think the conventional rock and roll bands existed in the 90s, and then it died. And then independent rock music, which also meant like a changing rock sound, kind of developed in the 2000s and late 90s. And part of that is shown in like how I think the word that I've latched onto from another music interview was one where Evan from Pine Grove talked about how music that he likes is moody. Like he likes when music is moody, and that was a really awesome way of putting to my like brain and stamping onto my brain like another character word for the things that I also like. And it's like, oh yeah, moody, like emotional music, but that kind of is a little bit more than your daily sort of emotion. And a lot of music is like that, but I don't know, moody's a great word for it. Even like garagey indie rock, like there's a lot of moodiness to all those genres. And the music videos used to display that. And I remember my first like real involvement with having my own musical identity was watching like really like weird music videos and rock music. Like that was a big 2000s, like had probably some of the best visual, like, and cheesy, but like also visual aids to their music, I mean, and I can even say more conventional rock bands, I feel like Queens of the Stone Age, even their music videos are like psychedelic and weird. And, I just think about their big one with Dave Grohl, their big hit, what is it called?
No One Knows?
No One Knows. Yeah, that one. I think about that, how like, it's kind of like has this weird background and, it's all swirly. But then on the other hand, you have like really illustrious and, dramatic music videos from people like Chemical Romance and even the weird, like, fake macabre, like feeling of that you get when you watch like 30 Seconds to Mars, their big hit music video, where they mimic your favorite movie.
The Shining.
The Shining, yeah. Those are the things that when you're like 8, 9, and 10 and like have this huge wonder about the world and huge like moodiness also, like early like internal moodiness, that childish like moodiness. That's like, I think a lot more people in that age group are watching that stuff than we might be led to believe.
Right.
Um,
The song's called "The Kill." Bury Me.
Kill, yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You're making such a good point about these music videos.
Right, so those visual elements so really what's cool about the digital spheres, you go to a record store, it's all curated for you, right? So it's like right there in front of you, here's all these records, and then all of a sudden you have multiple like multimedia sites that you can go to that aren't super separate. It's not like YouTube has content that you're not going to flow over into MySpace, and then that's going to flow over into like these other sites that are where you can the music piracy sites like LimeWire. It's all kind of connected. So you're a music lover, in the mid 2000s, you're watching YouTube videos, but then you're getting your music maybe from iTunes, or you're pirating it from LimeWire, or you want that. I mean, there's plenty of friends of mine that had music videos YouTube to MP3, and I know that they be YouTube videos. So you wouldn't just get like from the you wouldn't just get the song, you'd get like the whole music video audio wise. And I remember that being a big thing that we'd like don't do anymore. And it's funny because you can tell, you're like, oh, why is this version different? Listening with your friend on the iPod. Oh, this is the music video. That's a thing that I don't think happens anymore. Like, who wants the audio of an entire music video? It might be like a little bit of dialogue in the beginning, and then the song, and then more dialogue at the end or something.
Yeah, there's like a whole story around it.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially with the "Wake Me Up When September Ends" that video.
Yeah. I probably had the YouTube to MP3 on my on my thing from that. From I had a lot of Green Day stuff back then too. It's different than just calling it teenage angst. It's more like teenage confusion and wonder, and it's more specific feelings, especially from that music video. Or
yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like, that one's cool because there's like characters in it too, if I recall correctly. Yeah,
definitely, like actors.
Yeah. Like they made it like there's a film quality to all of them too.
Correct. Yeah, and I was gonna mention one of your favorite bands is Fall Out Boy, correct? Yeah, and for sure. A Little Less 16. That whole title, that whole vampire kind of music video, I love it. I just watched it pretty recently.
Really?
I actually really like the video. I remember watching it when I was younger, and there's a whole production to these videos.
Yeah, I mean those are the stuff that makes some bands in the mainstream, but with that underground background, like Fall Out Boy, I think like at that time so iconic. That's what separates like what makes Pete Wentz, for instance, the bassist, and kind of, I'm not even going to call him, he's the lyrical writer of the band, but he's also like the mood writer of the band. He's the person that stylizes the band, at least from what I've know and have read about them. Like the vision of creating sort of like very visually, I'm not just going to call it like alluring, but the dark elements, Tim Burton-esque, but not exactly, the sort of like the eyeliner and the Dracula thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of has like a Netflix vibe to it, like a Netflix teen series.
yeah. But he was smart in worrying about those things and thinking about those things, and like let's create a style for this band. Let's beyond just what the
right.
Let's represent this band. And music videos are really essential to Fall Out Boy. Even from the beginning, even before they were super, super huge, they were making music videos. I found stuff they were like trying to make little videos, documents of themselves, like from high school, even when Pat, the singer, was still like in high school or something. So
is Pat also a lyricist, or is it? I'm sure he works with it, but
yeah,
I was happy. I didn't know Pete Wentz had to play such a big role in that, in their vision.
Totally. I mean, he is kind of like that's a big thing that I don't know if a lot of people talk about it as much in music as a thing that like makes bands iconic. And sometimes it's not really the band's fault. It's just our perception of the band and music critics, what they want to focus on. That's a cool thing about Fall Out Boy, but I notice it with a lot of bands. There's always that one like icon, I guess is the best word for lack of a better term, but just like like a physical representation of the band in one member, you know. I'm obsessed with the idea of bands like Fall Out Boy where the maybe the main creative force isn't necessarily that icon. For instance, like in the Replacements, which is an old band from the 80s.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know I love them, and some of our friends love them a lot, and Jordan, I'm pretty sure, loves them. And they're a huge influence for Green Day. But the Replacements, I've been reading a lot about them lately. I just started a new book that our friend Sam Creasy gave me. And
Oh, nice.
he like mailed it to me during quarantine. I was like, you're the best. So I've been reading about them, and the sort of like visual, like, I mean, they're all visually interesting, but like the representation sort of like the Replacements, I would probably say was the young kid in the Replacements at the time, which was Bob Stinson's younger brother, Tommy Stinson. And so this guy was like 13, 14 when the band started, and the rest of them were like 20.
Wow.
And so it was crazy. People, like, part of the shtick of the beginning of the Replacements was like, let's go see this really loud, drunk, rambunctious rock band that like seems like they're about to fall apart, like a train, you know, about to fall off the rails, but somehow keeps it together for the most part in the early years. And also, by the way, like there's this kid jumping like, you know, 10 feet into the air or whatever, and he's like 14 years old. He's like tiny, and he's playing the bass.
No
You know?
way. That's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
cool. I think you're making really good points about how for rock music to survive, it has to continue to innovate.
Yeah, totally.
And that's probably the most important thing I would say, because if I were to argue if rock is dead now, I probably wouldn't. I would say it's just innovating in many ways. It's been changing this idea of a rock band since, like, you know, the 80s and 90s, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know how to describe it. I mean, I could just say in the more simple terms, everybody knows like the mainstream of rock music has died, but in some ways it just has never been more alive. Really all it is it's just about rock and roll. I think was about being really not cerebral about things, not overly like thinking about things. There's a sort of spirit of like carelessness, and that's I think what the Replacements brought back. But you know, they did it in 1979, 1980 until the 90s, and so people then went back and said, "Oh, Replacements, they're proto-alternative. Like they're the first alternative rock band, you know." And Husker Du and whatever, and like all these other bands, they're the first alternative bands, like rock music now that like really actually like rock music, like alternative music, or it's this huge like umbrella, is because I think the spirit of rock and roll went there because that's where alternative music is where rock and roll music has adapted. You know, rock proper has just become like, I mean, I don't even know what's on the rock charts anymore. Nobody does, you know, like what is.
It's just not at the forefront. It's not the mainstream part of music. We're not in a time right now where it's at that level.
I mean, really, like people crucify me on both sides for saying this, but like some rappers have that spirit of rock and roll, you know?
Absolutely. Think about Post Malone covering those Nirvana songs over the summer.
Yeah,
or
but not
Machine Gun Kelly.
Even some of his own songs, you know, that's not rock the sound that we've accustomed to.
Oh
that's
yeah, the new
rock.
album he did. He actually invited like Ozzy and like other features in rock background onto his album. That's a fair point.
Kids our age and beyond are going to come to like a bridge which I think I've come to now and have like accepted. I want to continue in the spirit of rock and roll. Either you like give up the guitar and continue in the spirit of rock and roll, or you can say, no, I would love the guitar as an instrument. I want to continue the tradition of like creating guitar music that's rock oriented. And I think if you want to do that, like naturally you find, okay, if you still want to do that and be innovative, you're going to fall under the alternative / indie rock like blanket and learn to find your place there, or create something super innovative and different in that world.
Correct.
You know, but definitely there's a point where like you can still create the spirit of rock and roll. And I think it's in stuff like, you know, some trap music or some of the, like, they even call it like emo trap or whatever, you know?
Right.
And I think it's really important to recognize that and I'm trying to get more into that stuff just to kind of get a more, I don't know, feel more connected, you know, like get a more whole understanding of like the history that we're living today, you know?
I get it. And so I've been talking about through these decades. I started in the 50s, and I noticed that rock's birth was really an alternative to like the mainstream pop. What I'm noticing now is mainstream pop has become rock.
Right.
And I think no matter whatever happens to the music industry, no matter which direction we go in, it's certain that rock will remain the soundscape for like most people's lives, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think it's crucial to say, especially like Americans too. You
Definitely.
know, Americans and the English, like because
Yeah,
that's where a lot of the big influential bands came from.
exactly. That's where
You
they
know.
share the most similarities, and we've obtained a lot of ideologies, I guess, from Britain. Thinking of
Mhm.
American Idol was birthed from the British version of that.
Oh
Just
yeah.
for
Oh,
instance, yeah.
I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that. The
Yeah, I mean
Office, I
that
guess.
in the beginning. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
all the comedy shows, of course. Which
Yeah.
one's
Right.
better? But no, definitely for. I mean, actually, I just thought of this now, but like a good point of music for like American Idol. Like, think about how that would change like the rock idol in a lot of ways.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's definitely like there's a thing about what I'll say, John, is like we've also had conversations about this where I don't think a lot of people like are willing to have both conversations, want to study all of it because oftentimes people will like debate about music or whatever, and somebody will be talking from like the mainstream context, and somebody else will be talking about like that genre or essentializing that specific world specifically. Um, but I think what's cool about the 2000s, like bringing it back to the 2000s, is again, you you know, independent music is now like legitimized in a way, so you can have two coexisting worlds of music. So when people say like, when we were younger, like, oh, do you love music? Yeah, I do. I know, like, the cool, maybe the cool thing that was also kind of mainstream then for like me, where I grew up, was like pop punk and maybe
Yeah,
like
yeah,
garage rock that got really big. And then kind of all those bands softened out their sound or had somebody master and mix their albums so that that sound softened out to be radio worthy, you know.
right.
But now I feel like, my whole sort of sentiment towards it has sort of changed. And now I see how some arguments with people and debates about music were kind of didn't make any sense because, you know, we were saying, oh, how influential is this or that, or how good is this or that? But somebody was arguing from a different context. Like they were looking at, well, from a mainstream context, how influential is Green Day or whatever, um, uh, in terms of like mainstream culture. But now, if you're talking about rock, it's really good to dissect, like, okay, but what is happening in independent music? Because that's just as legitimate, if not where the innovation is happening, where everything interesting is happening. The only difference is, it's just not, for one reason or the other, it's just not hitting the mainstream. And I think some of it is also deliberate. Independent musicians can say, no, I don't want to like sell my soul to have to keep doing this. And I don't have to. You can have me and Kyle, my drummer and Latchkey Kids, we always
Right.
have this fantasy about the middle class musician, you know, like the guy that is able, the guy or girl or what have you, is able to like live off of being a musician, but like humbly, and like not this sort of decadent like perception that we have of famous people, which is like the you know the party rock star or
Of
whatever.
course, yeah. The
Yeah,
life, the idol, all that.
yeah. So if you want that in 2020, give up your guitar and go do it. You know, go find it elsewhere, and that's fine. Like I think Billie Eilish is punk rock as fuck, actually, even though her sound is completely the opposite of what punk rock proper sounds like. There's
Hmm.
still a punk rock element to her. I mean, her entire style too is like punk rock. She's redefining what it means to, in some cases, to be a woman in music, and that's cool for somebody that's younger than me. And I don't even really listen to her music, but like that stuff should be supported. But
Yeah, I
you know,
agree with you there.
yeah, but the thing there is like she's not it's not super guitar based. There's guitars in her music, but it's not super guitar based music. So if
Yeah,
you are gonna love guitar music, my point is like I think the reality in 2020 is you have to actually love it, like, and be accepting of the fact that like you're not chasing this, she's my cherry pie, Guns N' Roses life, like that. Just is that's something that, by the way, I think a lot of people that are in bands, and you and I kind of can attest to this, still don't get that yet. They don't get that like that world is like gone, you know, like
Right.
you don't just grow your hair out and play like super masculine riffs and go somewhere. Like that's because it's been done and people are done. Like the 90s, you know, that was Pearl Jam, Nirvana. That's the last time that really happened.
Hmm.
And you know, the only band really still doing that is the Foo Fighters. And you know, that's because even still,
Right.
Dave was innovative in the 90s with that first album.
Exactly. But
That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah.
think about how like Foo Fighters fans and like band, even Green Day fans now,
Mm.
they're mostly following like this love of rock that they created from the 90s, really. And you know, I think Foo Fighters are kind of adapting in new ways. I don't know if you listened to their new song, but
Yeah,
I think it's a bit
I wasn't
innovative. It's definitely something that it's, you know, not
I
their
wasn't
typical sound.
I wasn't a fan, but I do agree. Like it's always good to change. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
No, I
point
agree with
where,
you. It wasn't like, you know, I didn't love it by any means, but I thought it was
yeah.
okay.
I mean, you also get to a point with a band, and I think that's something that, what from the outside perspective, I don't think we see it, and I think from the inside perspective, I have never seen it. Obviously, you know, we're just two music loving dudes from Jersey, so you know, we have. It's not like we know the inside scoop of what rich, successful musician life looks like, but I can imagine, and I've talked about this before. Where like I was a huge Foo Fighters fan, and they'll always kind of be a part of my formative music love. But they also, I think, are such an institution now. You know, it's like Dave has people that he has to feed because he has like a touring crew. He has X, Y, and Z. Like Dave was ready to go follow his artistic path and like grow away from the Foo Fighters and maybe grow more private, and do his own independent thing. He would be like maybe putting on a lot of people out of employment. You know?
Oh, I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a point where like you recognize, oh, this band has to keep going because like there's people to feed and there's people under them and under those people that are being fed by Foo Fighters, the company, you know?
Yeah. It's a
So
business, it's a whole company. Yeah.
exactly. So for me, like that's again mainstream versus independent music. Don't judge the Foo Fighters for being this crazy like or people that even bash bands. Like that's why I don't bash a band like the Foo Fighters or bash a band like Green Day. It's like, yeah, no crap, their sound changed or they tried something new or they had or label execs got involved. At this point they become too large to sustain in a creative way, like naturally, where you can take risks that are like actually like artistic, you know. um because you know probably the compromise right now for Billy Joe Armstrong is creating all these covers. He probably genuinely loves all those songs,
No,
and that's
yeah,
why he's, yeah, you know what I mean. That's probably the
of course.
compromise where he's like, all right, I'm not going to go on tour. How can I make a little bit of money for? And I know some of that money is going to people that you know aren't making money right now. It's not just going to Billy Joe Armstrong. But that's what I mean about like it's independent music in the 2000s is awesome because it's the first time where you can kind of work for a life as a musician that doesn't involve like all these extra miscellaneous parts and you know what I mean, and like learn to
Totally.
be comfortable with that. Like you don't need the label executive to exist. There's so much space in between. I guess you can look at it as like company and small business. Like the 2000s opens up the room for like a band to be a small business, not just a bunch of guys that suddenly become a company, you know?
Totally.
Anyway, that's my whole spiel on independent versus
Of
mainstream.
course. I mean, like we still see new Blink and Green Day, Foo
Music.
Fighters.
But look, John, if you look at other bands like that, okay, same age group, bands that even toured with them back in the day that didn't hit that critical mass. If you look at other bands in that world, they stopped making albums, you know, or they come back and only make an album they really want to, or you know what I mean, or they just go on tour every once in a while, or they balance it out with something else, or are in other bands. Um, you know, they're not really trying to remain relevant, and I think that's the problem is when we have all these people involved and people that made so much money off of them, they're trying to sustain that for as long as they can, you know. So even if Green Day's not making as much money now as they did, let's say in 2005 with American Idiot or whatever,
Right.
as that tour. Who knows? I don't know what the numbers are. There's probably still people on board from back then that are still on board today that want to, whether it's with the label or whatever, or with their touring crew, that like expect a certain income. You know, like you're super
Right.
successful, but you have to keep creating bullshit nonsense just to feed, this company machine. Because it's like, oh, anything with Green Day, because you'll always have mega fans all around the world. They're like, anything Green Day, I'm gonna buy it. Anything, anything Foo Fighters, I'm gonna buy it. And that's the whole point. That's why you have like the Green Day still making music and putting out an album every 2 to 3 years, when it's like the spirit's kind of gone.
Oh yeah.
Me being a 2000s music fan, actually, it's funny that you asked me to come on. My number one decade for my Spotify playlist was the 2000s. And again, I think because maybe I have this sort of like team feeling for like independent rock music, because I'm an independent rock musician. And honestly, you know, I think that's the best way to be right now, is to like embrace that. And there's so much just amazing independent rock music being made, from like just, indie pop, even some indie pop stuff that's still in the underground, indie rock, emo, hardcore is still like amazing in the underground. And, um, just punk rock altogether is like flourishing in so many ways. The 2000s for me was always like marked by pop punk. I'm sure that
Yeah.
that was the big mainstream, aside from garage rock. So aside from the Arctic Monkeys, the Strokes, all that stuff, the Queens of the Stone Age, even black, what are they called? White Stripes, Black Keys, all
Foo
that stuff.
Fighters.
Yeah, even Foo Fighters put them in that camp. Put like rock and roll or whatever. Put that over onto
Sure.
the side. Then you got like rock / alternative music that started coming about. That was pop punk. But there's so much underlying stuff that I'm realizing dates back to like the 90s and 80s, and now is all connected. And honestly, I think is hitting critical mass with an artist like Phoebe Bridgers. So you have like artists like Elliott Smith from the 90s doing all this like not radio stuff, touring and creating like a very localized fan base every place he went. Neutral Milk Hotel, the Microphones, Bright Eyes and stuff like that. So I've been really getting to that stuff, because I'm like, oh wow, these people are kind of innovating in all sorts of genres. Like the Microphones, I've been listening to a lot lately, and that Phil Elverum, his whole like catalog is amazing, like Mount Erie and all that stuff. He's just incredible, because he's like, one song is this beautiful like folk ballad, and then the next song is a metal song. But like it's all with this very niche Neutral Milk Hotel-y, like clipped vocals, clipped, whatever, and the microphones. But the point is, like, all that stuff was forming and now is coming to the forefront, and artists like Phoebe Bridgers, who like appreciated that stuff and took note of that stuff. What does suck though is that like music sales are less valuable if you want to sell your music.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you know that Phoebe Bridgers' Kyoto is nominated for Best Rock Song in the Grammys?
Best like
That's
alternative, best alternative rock, something like that, right?
I think it's just labeled rock, and I was curious about what you thought of that. How we're labeling rock nowadays. I know it's just the Grammys, and it's not the greatest example.
But it is the Grammys. That's the thing. And I think what it is, honestly, man, is that at the end of the day, and this is why a lot of musicians in underground rock, I think, and I've learned to kind of have the same. I didn't before. I thought it was annoying. People were like snobby when they had skepticism towards like, mainstream things. American Idol is now mainstream because it's just broadcast to so many people.
Right.
Grammys, mainstream, the radio, just in general, like pop radio, rock radio, even. Rock radio is either like classic rock, or it's like just stuff that like people actually in local scenes are not playing and doing. It's not the stuff you're going to hear like teenagers doing in a basement. And that's always, I think that's going to be always defining. Go find like where the life is actually happening. And that's where sounds are being created. That's the front bottoms, right? Like New Jersey's biggest indie rock band, I would say, from my like experience in the past, whatever, 5 to 10 years, that they were out in basements. They were out in, bars. They were actually existing in these spaces and not just, going to craft a certain sound specific to the radio or something. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just like the spirit of rock and roll, I think, is that former thing. It's doing that. And so Grammy, you're saying with me, for me, it's
Hmm.
like I'm skeptical as to what a Grammy really means anymore. You know, it's like what does a Grammy really mean anyway? I think Phoebe deserves a Grammy, but it's like, yeah, I mean, what can they label Phoebe's music? You know, more specifically, it's like, it's more of, to me, is more of like a folk. It's like a alternative
Yeah,
folk album. Um, but yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's like the whole idea of genres is just getting stupid, and that's what a lot of people are starting to agree on too. And I think people like the Grammys and whatever are actually clinging to find anything that they can. And also, like, it also reminds you that like Phoebe's really awesome and she has that underground background as well, but she's also kind of like a big artist now too, and in a good way. Like this album propelled her, and I hope she can
definitely.
she can
Really
really
did.
still, like, I agree with you. It's this weird bittersweet thing. We're like, yes, I want this person to be propelled, but do you really call this rock music? I guess you do, because rock lovers love her, like us, even though she's
Definitely.
not necessarily like doing rock music or whatever.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
guitar music. That's what they need to do. They need to make a separate genre called guitar. Like, who did the best guitar music this year? Here's a Grammy. That's what they should do.
Right. I think there, you said it earlier that there were still guitars used in music. They're just not at the forefront anymore. Maybe just like a separate Emmy award just for guitar music. It has a little good, it's golden guitar or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And one final question for you. Do you like the way music is heading, or are you a little concerned?
I love that question. So there's really so many ways to look at it. I'm not going to, again, monopolize time, but you and I are both involved in underground music and want to be more involved, and like are really eager to do that. Where we come to this conclusion that I kind of mentioned earlier, where there is a distinction between independent music and mainstream music. Before, it used to be you're independent and everybody, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like you're either a hobbyist and you just do it for fun and you're creating independent music or whatever, or you're an actual artist and you don't really, and I think that's so admirable, where like there's no profit manifestation at all for you. And then there's what's it called? This whole idea of I'm doing this, but with the intent to like grab a mainstream, to become a mainstream rock musician. Um, that doesn't exist anymore. So we have the mainstream world, but now you have this other world where like you don't just have to be an artist that isn't profit minded. You can still be profit minded, and but you can like actually be more in control. Maybe that turns into being in the mainstream, like a Phoebe Bridgers, or maybe not.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and that's okay too. I would say this: the relationship of fan to musician and to creator or whatever has never been more personal than today, and that's a really cool thing that we're experiencing. And so, to answer your question in short, now, um, the place mainstream music is headed for rock music is is kind of like used to piss me off and make me angry, but now is negligible for me. Like I don't really care anymore, because whatever I think is not in rock music anymore, I can either find it in independent music, or try to as a creative, which is really awesome, is like do it myself. Like say what I want to say myself. And I think that's
Yeah.
I'm trying to I've kind of evolved from having that cynical music sucks nowadays. What's the there's point playing guitar. There's that feeling of like
Hmm.
there's no reason why I should play the guitar anymore. So many other people have done it before me and they're way, way better. And anyway, even if I was amazing, it wouldn't matter, because I'm never going to get the attention I deserve or something. I think that's a really young and naive um, way of looking at it, which, not to say that you don't have moments where you think in ways like that, but evolving out of that is being positive about, oh, like actually, when there's no road, you can pave your own. You know what I mean? And I think that didn't exist before. With like in the online
Right.
world, you can literally pave
Absolutely. And
your
that
own
was my
spot.
point from the beginning, that, this digital age has created a new way to find fame in a lot of ways.
Yeah, or even redefining fame. I mean, we could talk about that. Like, you can be a successful musician and have, you know, let's call it celebrity or whatever, notoriety or esteem and respect at least, and not be this like tabloids mega millionaire or whatever, you know. And
Hmm.
that's, I think a lot of, you know, even when I tell people like, oh, I want to be a musician, they're like, oh, like, you know, they put you in that lens of like, oh, so you want to do this, yeah, and good luck or whatever. It's like, no, like I just want to, you know, create my own thing and relate to people that, you know, can relate to it, you know,
Totally.
whatever size audience. And you can do that now for sure, you know. Spotify also just is like is a blessing and a curse as well. Like they're robbing people blind of their money, you know, creators and
Oh my
whatever.
God, yeah.
But at the
That's another issue.
I know a sacrifice I'm making by putting my music on Spotify. But also this year I found out that like our music is being played in different countries and different places, and we're not even like a huge band or anything, but it's just you put it on Spotify, playlists move in different places. Like that's a cool
Whereas
thing,
that
you
is so
know.
cool. That's a
It
great
is cool.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
tell the viewers your Spotify account, whatever. That make sure that make sure they can reach your music after if they listen to this.
Yeah. Hopefully soon I might do some solo stuff, and that's probably just going to be under my name, just Hanny, or probably I don't know, maybe Hanny like Raw, Hanny RA. But the stuff that I have music under now and that's on Spotify is through my band Latchkey Kids. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's on Spotify.
and Apple Music for those Apple Music like 3 listeners out there. You know,
Yeah, yeah. No, there's some people that listen. We have
I'm one of
also
them, dude. I have it.
on Apple Music. Oh, that's awesome. We have friends in I have a friend in Austria, like or two friends in Austria, and that's like it's like two countries that play our Apple Music
That
music,
is crazy. I can't
and
believe you have that statistic. You can see that.
you can yeah no you can you can
Really cool.
that's the good thing that Spotify lets us do is like here you can now think about that, like there's I don't have to pay anyone to do that. Technically, yeah, there's like the publishing thing to do that every year, but I get all
Right.
this like statistics and information. And after touring, what's cool about touring was like going up and down the East Coast was like you could come back from that and see, oh, what oh, these people use Spotify more or whatever, or we actually you know benefited by staying in Virginia for a while or whatever. We have like listeners in Virginia now, you know, stuff like that. Like
Cool.
that's a really cool change, even on a very micro level, like for us in our
Yeah.
tiny little band, you know. um it's awesome though. That is really awesome. And no, like I'm in charge of it. Like I, the creative, can look at that and say, what do I want to do with this information?
Right.
And it's good that you have that information now, you know.
That's so cool. I wish you the best of success to spreading your music around the country, the East Coast, the West Coast, to more people in Austria. But I think that's a really great,
I appreciate that, man.
of course, man. And thanks again for being on the podcast. That means a lot, and your wisdom and your knowledge. It went really well. So
Yeah, thanks for letting me you know run like a chicken with my head off on this stuff. It's my favorite
anytime,
stuff.
man.
Listen, man, anything independent music related, especially, I've really become obsessed. And whatever you want to talk about, you know, whether it's songwriting, whatever, even if it's whatever, you know, I'll come on.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I know it was like a 2000s episode, but I think we touched on some really modern topics,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is
No
exactly what I'm
worries.
looking for.
No, 2000s is the wave, man. To be honest with you, the stuff I've been writing about with Latchkey Kids lately is kind of like revisiting the 2000s, because I think the 2000s was also another. Sorry to throw in another thousands, but music is sort of sincerity to a lot of the music I like. That now, I don't know if you agree with me, but our generation I think is like probably the most ironic generation ever. You know, like especially like online, like memes and whatever, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Like we're very like irony based instead of like sincerity based.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
and I'm probably just like really gullible and overly sincere with stuff, which is why I really like sincerity. I don't know how to call
No,
it.
I know exactly what you're saying. I think
Ye-
our humor on social media in general is very ironic. Yeah, that's a good way of
Yeah,
putting it.
yeah.
So you're more
So
of a sincere guy.
yeah, I mean that's the most insincere thing you could probably ever say. I'm pretty sincere, you know. But I like sincere art and sincere. Uh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just stuff that that takes itself seriously while also not taking itself seriously, but brings you along for the ride. It doesn't like
Correct.
it doesn't leave you out of a joke or something.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
I think self-aware. You're
yeah,
being sincere and you know exactly what you're doing. You're not being something you're not.
yeah, sure. And I think there's even in emo music a really tendency, which is like admirable. Like part of the whole localism thing is like, I mean, how many inside jokes can I fit into an album? I mean, even naming certain songs, I do this too. Like, there's this sort of like local fetishism of emo music, of like, you know, naming a song after like your local movie theater or something or whatever. It's almost like this. There is an irony to it because it's like there's an exclusivity to it. Like, you know, oh, only people to get this. And I really mean like more specific things, like, you know, I don't know, jokes and whatever. But the point is, I think that the 2000s was a time for like overly dramatic music is what I really loved. Sure, but like also really sincere stuff. And I think like punk rock hit critical mass in the 2000s. Like it became pop punk, you know, like pop rock, if you want to say, became a thing, you know, since the Beatles, sure, but like um, punk music had such a rich history from the 70s and even some proto punk bands in the 60s, but like didn't really become this thing till Green Day. I would say like really became this huge thing. And then the 2000s was like where it exploded and everybody knew about pop punk and whatever. Um, but in essence, like there's a sincerity to that stuff. And, you know, what I'm with is kind of captured, you know, in tandem my childhood and like my early teenage years with that like world of music, you know, in context with that world of music.
Right.
Because there is totally a fascination about it. Like it's just funny to think about all the kids that were dyeing their hair back then, and you know, wearing lip rings, and you know, going to skate parks and going to like, for us we had the skate zone. I don't know if you remember the skate zone.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and like ice skating in like South Jersey, and you know, like being like scrappy but like edgy and moody, you know, and like drinking Monster and going to Warp Tour. Like all of those kids that were like 5-10 years, you know, older than me are like parents now and have jobs, and you know, and so there's just like I have such a like wistfulness about that time, you know, and a sort of like big feelings, and it's just I love the 2000s overall. It's very special to me.
Well, I'm
So
happy you were on to talk about it all.
yeah, thanks for having me. That's
Of course,
my
man.
well, good luck. I wish you the best
Thanks,
of luck as
dude.
well.
Thank you very much for being on. This means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, man. Have a good
Take
night.
care.